Welcome, UCF fans, to another edition of the Daily Night. I am your host, Brian Smith, and I'm also the publisher at Inside the Knights on Fan Nation, powered by Sports Illustrated. Today, I'm going to kick off this episode with talking about the USF defense, or lack thereof. This is one of the worst defenses in the country, and the UCF Knights should absolutely roll them. There's no two ways about it. I just put a Twitter post up talking about their stats. They're ranked in the 116, 127, 128. They're just awful on defense. But I'm going to break down some of the things that UCF can do to take advantage of that. And after looking at the stats and watching them play a little bit on film, there's no doubt in my mind that barring UCF shooting itself in the foot, they're going to score over 40 in this game on Friday at 3:30. So let's get right into it. Point number one. And these stats just, again, they are horrific. So with that, the first thing that any defensive coordinator is going to tell you, you see him on the sideline with a reporter, we've got to stop the run. We got to stop the run. Well, apparently that memo has been lost on the Bulls. They give up 210.4 yards per game out of 130 schools in the NCAA at the FBS level. They are number 116, meaning they are terrible. And unfortunately for them, out of all the stats I'm about to give you, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stats. That is the best. Repeat. That is the best. Not a good sign for the Bulls. They do have one player, though, in particular that can play for anybody. And his name is Antonio Greer. He's their linebacker. He does a little bit of everything. For him, and really the whole defense, I'm just kind of curious to see what UCF comes up with. Are they going to scheme against him or what? Because, again, his stat line is legit. He's the one guy. He's got 83 tackles, I believe. Yeah, 83 tackles. That's impressive. A linebacker with 2 picks, so obviously he can play in space against the pass. He's got a fumble recovery. They returned a few yards. Again, 83 tackles. 47 of them are credited to him as solo. That's the one guy you got to kind of watch out for, and he will get after it in the backfield as well. 7.5 TFLs and 3 sacks. This young man is a very good football player. So outside of him, though, that's a dominant guy. They got a few of the guys that are pretty decent. The drop-off is precipitous. They just don't have the size up front. I looked a little bit at their depth chart, etc., and the depth, there's something wrong. They just fired their defensive coordinator on Sunday. I mean, they're in turmoil in Tampa. I expect UCF to come right at them, and there's no reason not to. Even if Isaiah Bowser does or does not play, it doesn't matter. And today at the press conference, Gus did not know. He said that Bowser practiced a little, but we'll see how it goes through this week. I just don't see how they're going to stop a junior, senior-laden group of offensive linemen for the Knights. And quite frankly, I don't see how they're going to do that even for a quarter. You cannot be ranked number 116 and me have any faith in you. You are what you are by midseason, but after 11 games, you're just freaking that dude. Good, bad, or indifferent, and they stink. So let's look at a few things from a statistical standpoint, game by game. Because, certain teams are going to run the ball more. Certain teams have a better attribute to do it in a certain way or have a special player that you don't match up with. There's a lot of different things to kind of look at. And defensively, USF, to be that bad, and open-endedly here, I haven't looked at this because it's scary. Again, I'm a run defense guy. If you can't do that, you've lost my interest. But I'm going to guess there's going to be at least 3 games they gave up 280 or more before I look at this screen. And if you're ranked number 116, that's probably just on par. So let's see what we have for the Bulls. Well, the first 2 games didn't start out very well for them in that regard. North Carolina State, 293. Then the Florida Gators with 363. Yeah, that's not good. I'm wrong, though. They only had those 2 games that were over 280, but they did have Tulsa ran for 269. East Carolina ran for 251. Houston ran for 261. Cincinnati ran for 202. Tulane had an off week last week with 190. The last 4 games in particular had just been a disaster. 251, 261, 202, 190. They are just really getting thrashed. And while you could probably take out the Florida game, that's a whole nother level of talent. They got 3 guys that at least make the combine at running back for the University of Florida. Damian Pierce in particular, he's a tremendous player. They don't give the ball enough to. Looking at this, it's consistent. The only team that they slow down is the one that everybody slowed down, Temple. They're probably the worst team in the American from what I saw just on the eye test. Temple was terrible. Besides them, their next quote-unquote best rush defense was Florida A&M, 132. That's not Division I. The next was BYU, and they gave up 35 points to them, and BYU threw the ball pretty decently and still ran fairly well in that game too. BYU 25 carries for 143 yards. UCF should stomp a mud hole in their front seven based on this. Again, by game 6, you are pretty much who you are. Injuries, experience, bringing freshmen up to speed, etc. UCF is going to smash them in the face. These stats are ridiculous. I saved this for myself just in the podcast to see it, but I had all the other stuff here. I kind of wish I hadn't seen this. It kind of takes some of the drama out. UCF, just based on this alone, if they do not win this game by 10 points or more, it's on them. This is a 2-9 team, and I know they got some talent, some younger guys. But if you cannot stop the run against a Gus Malzahn coach team, and they've got good running backs. Gus was gushing about his two guys. I asked about Johnny again today. He's my guy on offense. I think he has a world of potential, and he had 14 carries for 147 yards this past weekend against UConn. I think that they're going to do pretty well with or without Bowser. I'm going to say 220 is the over-under number for what the Knights run for against USF. And that's, quite honestly, pretty close, 210.4. So that's the first stat I want to talk about. The second one, I think, is a little iffy, although they're dead last in it. But there's a reason I'm going to put these two together that you may not understand at first. But if you cannot stop the run, I don't care if you have Lawrence Taylor in his prime, your sack totals will go down. And the reason is it's 2nd and 6, 2nd and 5, 2nd and 4. Heck, it's 1st and 10, then it's 1st and 10 again. You must be able to get teams in 3rd and 5 or longer. College and pro football, it's just straight across the board. Can you get teams in 3rd and 5 or longer? It's a checkbox. If you cannot do that consistently, your sack numbers will suck. Teams will take more chances to run draws, just do basic RPOs and throw flat passes on 3rd and 4 or less. Why? It's low risk. They don't get it. Your quarterback doesn't get hit, and it's still going to be close. And a lot of times teams will go for it. 4th and 1, 4th and 2. 3rd and 5 is where that number kind of starts to change. 3rd and 6, definitely. That's a passing down. And then, of course, 7, 8, and everything else, it's a pass. If you run on that, it's just a total risk. Unless you definitely want to go for it on 4th down, then that's a whole other animal. 4th down, they can't even get to that. Teams are getting 1st downs after like 2 runs for the most part. If you look at their rush, this is insane. Their rush defense has given up 2,314 yards. But that's not the stat that's worse. There's 2 other stats that are worse, believe it or not. They've given up 27 rushing touchdowns. And that's not number 1. That's number 2. Number 1 is 5.76 yards per tote for the opposing team. That's not good. That's not good at all. So that is why they have 9 sacks. Now, part of that's talent. They don't have enough guys, and I'm not trying to pick on them, but they only have 9 sacks. They're dead last in the NCAA, tied with 2 other teams, so they rank them 128. There's 2 more. There's really 130, but they're ranked number 128, tied with 2 other schools. You're not going to get to rush the quarterback when everybody's 2nd and 5. It's just too easy. They can run play action. They can run draw. They can run quarterback bootleg. They can do anything they want on 2nd and 5. According to that, technically, I should round up at 2nd and 4. Again, Lawrence Taylor is looking at the sideline. What am I going to do? You're not going to win in that situation. So they don't have enough players. They just fired their coordinator. Gus even mentioned it's kind of weird. You don't know what the heck the game plan for because you don't know what they're going to do now. They're probably going to throw the kitchen sink at UCF. What do they have to lose? And to that end, that's fine. That's what Tulane did. But now the Knights have seen that. I expect UCF to throw some deep shots on some kind of fade patterns where it's quick release, even though it goes down the field, jump ball situations. Johnson's got plenty of length. He's 6'2", 195, 6'3", somewhere in that range. And then, of course, the speed they have, Titus, Ryan, Jalen, those guys can all go. Amari, he can go. Somebody's going to catch a deep pass early on in this game, and it's going to put USF in a bind. So curious to see if the Bulls even get a sack, because technically they're not even averaging one per game. 9 out of 11 games. That is terrible. So with that, the sack thing is very interesting. Will UCF run a little bit more drop back? Because again, I think they're going to bring the kitchen sink. They have nothing to lose. They're 2-9. What the heck difference does it make? But what do I know? I'm not coaching, but my guess is probably as good as anybody. Because again, USF just fired their defensive coordinator. With that, the next stat that I want to talk about is just the pass defense in general. This is somewhere in the middle of my concern level. If I was a USF fan, coach, player, whatever, you can't be in a situation where you're in 2nd and 5, 2nd and 4 teams running the ball on you. Your pass defense is going to suffer. But I was a little bit surprised, kind of looking at some of these numbers earlier. Teams threw the ball on them a little bit more than I would have expected the last few weeks. And I don't know if it's due to injuries. I'm not going to go looking at it. If you're 2-9, I don't need to dig into who you are. When the Knights played Cincinnati, I wanted to know about a couple of key guys on their defense because they're NFL first, second, third round picks. Fair enough. This team doesn't have that kind of collection of talent. Obviously, they wouldn't be 2-9. But looking at the stats, Houston threw for, holy cow, 385 and completed 80.8% of their passes. I don't care if they're pop passes, flat passes, that little, you catch it and then you just kind of jump it to the guy in front of you from 2 feet. It counts as a completion, but 80.8? I mean, did they even try? Has this team quit? Maybe that's why they gave up on their defensive coordinator, because the players gave up on him. So here's some of the numbers, but it's mind-boggling. They did okay. Again, Temple. Temple was the one game they played pretty decently. 12 of 21, only 183 yards, 1 touchdown, but they got 2 picks in that game. That's not bad. They've only got 10 on the year. 2 of them came against Temple. Not surprising. Temple is really, really bad. That being stated, after the Temple game, the numbers in terms of the yardage for the last 4 are just brutal. East Carolina had a really balanced attack. 220 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks. Houston, 385, 14.8 yards per attempt. I mean, that's insane. And then 3 touchdowns, no picks. And then Cincinnati didn't have a huge total in terms of yardage per completion, but they just picked them apart. 31 of 40, 77.5%, 304 yards, 7.6 per attempt, 2 touchdowns. Ritter did throw a pick, which is a bit surprising. Then the last game against Tulane, 19 of 24. He smoked them. 79.2%, 311 yards, 13 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. They did get something out of it. So this is a defense that's just getting killed on both sides. But I'm going to keep coming back to this. It starts with their inability to stop the run. The American Conference has had good quarterback play for a long time. This is not going to be anything different this year. They didn't even, come close to slowing down some of the better teams like SMU. You knew they weren't going to stop them. You knew they weren't going to stop Cincinnati. You kind of just, in general, anybody. But I mean, like Houston's pretty good, but 80.8%? That's no good. USF is going to have to all but just completely change their defense in about 3 days. Good luck. That's like creating the world in 3 days. God needed 6 or 7, depending on who you ask. I don't think USF's in good situation here. The other thing that I want to bring up with that, and this kind of goes into both categories, tackles for loss, depending on how you want to look at it, they can get marked differently. They're really bad at that, just like sacks, and it goes right along with the rushing situation. They don't create penetration. They don't make good tackles near and behind the line of scrimmage. Their tackles for loss, they're 127 out of 130 teams. 127. That's brutal. They only have 43 of them on the year in 11 games. So that's technically less than 4. You want to be around 8 to 10 a game. They're about half that. So that's no good at all. Their passing D is 122. Their total D is 125. I mean, it's amazing. They're 5 worst teams, 488.4 yards per game that they give up. Again, this is just really, really bad. And it's instrumental in the game of football that you play at least some level of defense. But I really think that a lot of their players just quit. It's just my opinion. You can't be that bad. These stats are ridiculous. And be on, in this league, it's just not possible. There's some pretty darn good players, but I'm looking for the next team, even in this league. Oh boy, it's going to take a while. I don't even see the next one. Tulane, 102. That was the next, 433, and they were at 488. Oof. 55 more yards between dead last and next to dead last. That's horrific. With all that, here's your question, then I'll wrap it up in segment 2. It's a little shorter, but here's your question. With all this information I just gave you about how horrific, and I mean they stink on defense, SMU and all these teams just ran over them, Houston, blah, 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 how bad USF is, what would be your plan of attack? Because it seems like it's just free apple pie. What do you want? Here you go. It's Thanksgiving this week. Here's free apple pie. What do you want? You want some pumpkin pie too? Okay. You want some cherry pie? You're going to have a smorgasbord of pie. Whatever one you want. I like apple pie. That's why I bring it up. The point is this. It doesn't matter what you pick. They are just that bad. USF hasn't stopped anybody consistently all year. Temple doesn't count. They stop themselves. So with that, here's your other point. Does UCF get better this week by playing them? That's what we're going to talk about in segment 2. It's one thing to beat your rival, but this is a young football team, and Gus has talked about this forever. You shouldn't just come out and cruise up 21-3 in the mid-second quarter and then just put your foot on the brake. You need to execute your game plan. You need to put your foot on their throat, end it, go up at half 35-3, something like that. This is a bad football team. I know they've got talent, and I talked about Timmy McClain and stuff, and he can definitely make plays. If you haven't read about him, you need to. He's a special talent. He's just not figured it out yet because he's a true freshman quarterback. He's from the same high school as the twins that are committed to UCF. Great talent. And Jimmy Horn, his young receiver that he played with him, also from Seminole High School. That program's got dudes. They're just not ready yet to kind of take that next step. And they don't have the pieces around them, especially up front on offensive and defensive lines. They just don't. So should UCF attack run, attack pass? I say just run your offense, but expect to make the first guy miss and try to score. They're not stopping anybody. Why would you not think you're going to score? I really think this is the game where Ryan O'Keefe takes one of those basic screens, slips a tackle, and punches his ticket into the end zone from 50 on one of the most generic, everybody knew it in the stadium, it's coming plays you've ever seen. That's what, to be dead last, and certain stats are close to it, and number 125 out of 130 in total defense, there's no reason to think that UCF won't do that. So, 2 things before I get out of here. Number 1, again, before anybody asks me, I have no idea Bowser's going to play. Gus doesn't know either. You could tell he was sincere. Hey, we're going to check him out at practice. He went through warm-ups and all that, emergency only, blah, 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 for the last game. But looking down from the press box, we could tell he was gimpy. He was not ready to play. He's got an ankle sprain before anybody asks. Number 2, there is not a single skill position player, excuse me, that shouldn't get at least one opportunity if they get the ball 3 times to punch their ticket to the end zone. And what I mean by that is it could be a short crossing route, a slant, a deep over route, a screen, like the little screens they consistently run with Ryan O'Keefe that he's good for 5 to 8 yards. That could be a punch it to the tick, all the way. Screen, bubble, obviously a bomb, anything like that. If a guy gets at least 3 catches, this is the kind of defense you can score on. And then there's the asterisk, and that's Johnny. If there was ever a game that was meant for him to take one to the house from 90 or something, this is the ticket right here. USF is not sound defensively. I don't need to go scraping through their film to know that. They're ranked number 125 for a freaking reason. They stink. There is no way around it. USF should get rolled in this game. I hadn't even thought about the score or anything until I started digging and looking at stats today. Look, you can read my game prediction on Friday morning, and I get a bunch of people that read that, and that's fine. I'll put in my reasons, some specifics. I'll dig into more. But here's the thing. Unless I see something totally different between now and the end of this week, I can't see why. UCF, in my opinion, will win by 3 touchdowns or more. I know some of the other guys in the media will look at it differently. It's a rivalry game and all that, but the analytics just say different. It's on UCF, not USF, if there's not a larger margin than 2 touchdowns. You might get a freak play, a block punt, something, whatever it is. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing things out to maybe mitigate a little bit of that. 20 points, 21 points is bottom end on what the Knights should win by this Friday when they take the field against USF. That's just the way it is. They're far, far ahead of them. And the last little piece I'll add, the offensive line for UCF against a defense like this, they're going to wear them out. That's why I mentioned the first thing, like 220 being the minimum. They had Jackson up there today, Big Sam, talking at the press conference. He was the last guy to go. And he's just a great example of the level-headedness, the consistency, the grind, all those things you talk about. He mentioned like taking care of your body because you're beat up at the end of the year. Everybody is. You're sore. You got to figure it out, blah, blah, blah. He's what you want. He's a leader. And that's why UCF has been pretty successful despite just being bludgeoned by injuries this year. They'd have won at least 2 more games if it wasn't for injuries. They weren't going to beat Cincinnati, and they probably weren't going to beat SMU the way they played. But anything else, they'd have beat SMU. Maybe, I guess that's possible. Cincinnati for sure not. But Louisville, they'd have won if they were healthy. And the Navy game, they would have won. This is a pretty good football team. On the other side, I don't know the whole injury situation for USF, but they're just not in the same stratosphere with where the Knights are. And USF, regardless of that, they got to go against a team now. Jalen's getting pretty healthy. Johnny is playing better and better. Ryan O'Keefe's better. And then the player I haven't even talked about is Keene. That's something that Gus was real happy about today. I could tell like he had a different bounce in his step about him. I don't know what happened, but he thought he played his best game this past week. So with Jackson and all those guys protecting for them, I expect the Knights to push 500 yards of offense. 450 is kind of the minimum. And I think we're going to see 3 or 4 big plays, meaning 30-plus yard plays for touchdowns, possibly 60-plus yard play, at least one. So, again, I don't know what I'm going to pick for a final score, but 3 touchdowns is kind of my bottom end right now. So everybody have a great night. Thank you very much. And I will talk to you soon. A lot more stuff coming up about the war on I-4 on Inside the Knights on Fan Nation.